The Exorcist, the Demon and the Dam by Russell Miles. Father Kira pulled on his coat. He felt cold. The old church was in front of him. "Are you all right with the steps?" he asked a young man idling beside him. The wind picked up and leaves fluttered about. A street light flickered. Brennan walked on his toes along the pavement. He paused, lifted one foot, then the other, up the steps at the front of a church. "I'm all right, I can walk." He ran his hands through his tangled brown hair. "I know you can walk," responded Father Kira. "It's just that the church is, well, a Marian sanctuary." He tugged at his wax corset to keep it firm. "A what?" explained Brennan as he took another step. "A sanctuary, holy ground. Demons don't like entering the place. Do you feel anything difficult?" Dark clouds formed overhead. "My entire life is difficult." Brennan stopped to regain his breath at the top of the steps. "I've been stumbling around since I was 10 years old. I get grumpy, girls look away, I can't chew, I'm cursed." "You are loved by the Lord," said Father Kira. "Do you feel anything at all? Nausea, numbness, neck ache, feeling of dread?" "My neck always aches. I can hear voices. Might be a radio playing." "You are handsome," offered Father Kira as he waited. Brendan let out a loud fart. A cat scurried by, stopped with its hairs raised as it hissed towards Brennan, then ran away. The wind blew stronger. "I think we'd best be getting inside." Father Kira walked up the stairs towards the door and pulled them open. "This way." Brennan shuffled along, one step at a time. They walked through the navex and towards the entrance of the church nave. Brennan flinched and then threw one arm above his head. Then he staggered to one side. "I shall not pass into this den," came a deep-throated voice. "What did you say?" asked Father Kira. "I didn't say anything," responded Brendan as he panted. Father Kira took an arm and guided Brendan into the nave and along an aisle down the side of the pews. "I'm not going," the voice sounded again. "You are," asserted Father Kira. Brendan leant into Father Kira as they paced. The church was old, with plaster ordination in the ceiling to create the look of stonework. Father Kira found the light switch, turned them on. The rear lights, the middle and the front, came on, each after the other. The church brightened, shining on the wooden lectern, polished wooden railings, large candelabra, and the revered tabernacle. "Too bright," groaned the voice. "You again," intoned Father Kira. "This is beautiful. The brightness of the Lord pressing into your darkness." "Into my what?" asked Brennan. "Praying, my son." They continued walking together. "Why do we have to go to the church? Why couldn't you come to my home?" Brennan stumbled. Father Kira placed an arm around Brennan's back. "I imagine that is what you see in movies or on the TV. But it has to be a church, a sanctified place." They stopped, adjoining a small chapel. "I guess night is appropriate for ghoulish things," said Brennan. "Not really. Could be at any mass, morning, day, evening." Brennan belched, then farted again. He tensed up. "I think I've fouled myself." "Don't be embarrassed. It's to be expected. Why, I wanted to avoid a mass and with other folk about. We also had to wait till the choir's rehearsal was finished." Father Kira looked at his wristwatch. "Still, we need a witness. I was expecting a member of the parish council to meet us." Just then a woman walked down the centre aisle wearing a floral dress, hair in a scarf and carrying a bucket of flowers. She looked up. "Hello, Father Kira. And is that you, Brennan?" She walked to a stand with a big vase. "Don't bother me." She put down the bucket. "I'll be out of your hair in a jiff." "Mrs. McKenna," explained Father Kira as he strode towards her. "You just may be able to help." He took her arm and led her over to the chapel. "Hello, Mrs. McKenna," said Brennan. He farted again and held his hands to his eyes. Mrs. McKenna giggled. "Better out than in, they say." She made a small fart herself and laughed with her hands covering her face. Father Kira grinned, then put on a serious face. "We've got a little ceremony to perform." He took out a small book from his pocket. "A prayer, mostly." "Happy to help," said Mrs. McKinnon. "If you could sit here." Father Kira shifted a chair at the side of a chapel to create some distance. "And Brennan, if you could sit here," he said as he moved another chair next to the small statue of Jesus on the cross. Brennan shuffled over and sat with a thump. "Too close." "Shut up," muttered Father Kira. He looked about for the plastic sheet he had asked the janitor to leave. He saw it to the side of the statue of Mary. He picked it up and rolled it out in front of the chair that Brennan was sitting in. Brendan rolled his head to one side. "Necessary prudence, Father?" Saves complaints from the janitor. Complaints about what? Asked Mrs. McKinnon. Tell her, came the throaty chuckle from Brennan's mouth. The lights in the church dim. What was that, Brennan? Asked Mrs. McKinnon. Please, just sit, begged Father Keira, and you just wait. Mrs. McKinnon mumbled to herself as she sat. Father Keira thumbed through the small book he'd been carrying. What is that? Asked Brennan. The Compendium of the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church, answered Father Keira. He flicked through the pages. I'm checking the form of the prayer for an exorcism. You don't know how to do an exorcism? You are conducting an exorcism? Asked Mrs. McKinnon. Yes, said Father Keira. Are you okay with that? He turned towards Brennan. I know the general forms and custom, but it's not something I do that often. Well, I've never conducted an exorcism before. Quite okay, said Mrs. McKinnon, always willing to help. She looked at Brennan, her eyes sad. Sweet boy. Brennan shuffled in the chair. I'm not okay, the lights flickered. I don't care about you. Father Keira turned the pages of his book, sliding his fingers down the lines. Don't do that, Brennan. Do what? That. He pointed at the chair. Brendan was levitating 6 inches above it. Oh, explained Mrs. McKinnon. Brendan heaved himself down on the chair. I'll read out the prayers and you do the responses. Like in Mass, offered Mrs. McKinnon. Like in Mass. What do I do? Asked Brennan. What I tell you to do. Abby in malum chrism, chided the voice. I'll be hoisting you up on a terrible cross if you don't be quiet. Father Keira started the prayer. Our Father, thy kingdom come. Is that he? Asked Mrs. McKinnon. The responses, sighed Father Keira. Lord have mercy. Brendan grimaced. Father Keira gripped the book firmly in his hand. Our Father, thy kingdom come. A low rumble sounded through the church. Lead us not into temptation. Lord have mercy, recited Mrs. McKinnon. I defy you and your holy books, intervened the voice. The lights went off and then came back on again. God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, Brennan winched, then spat at Father Keira. That's not very nice. Mrs. McKinnon, Father Keira wiped his face. Sorry, Father, she clasped her hands together. Lord have mercy. Christ, we appeal to thou holy name. Brendan abruptly thrashed about, groaning loudly. A gust of wind caused the drapes to flutter. Humbly beg your forgiveness, that you might grant us help against this unclean demon. Father Keira established a rhythm. Brendan again started to rise off the chair. The drapes fluttered wildly. Free this tormented creature of yours, through Christ our Lord. Someone's left the window open, said Mrs. McKinnon. Shall I close them? Father Keira looked at Mrs. McKinnon and raised his eyebrows. Lord have mercy, said Mrs. McKinnon. I am the devil, more powerful than your petty scrolls. God the greater, defender of the human race, look down and pity your servant. Brennan belched, flushed about, gripped his hair and tugged out the tussles of fine brown fibres. A deep voice rumbled through the church and the lights dimmed further. Stop! Don't hurt the boy, cried Mrs. McKinnon. Brennan's face became taut, his skin stretched out, his face becoming unrecognisable. Release thy faithful servant. Did you say devil? Father Keira lowered the book. You are nothing but a petty demon, taking advantage of a vulnerable child. I spit on your Cossacks, your vestment, your so-called holy books. I spit on your brown shoes. A thunder clash sounded. That is so rude, chided Mrs. McKinnon. Lord have mercy. Why are you wearing brown shoes? Asked Brennan. Aren't priests attire black shoes? It's my day off, replied Father Keira. And you, my little devil, I might give you a test. What about this? Thundered the voice. The lights increased in brightness. Brendan abruptly stood and flung the chair high in the air. The lights flashed as the chair smashed against the floor, with pieces breaking and scattering about. We have other chairs. Father Keira strode to the front of the church, picked up a heavy altar chair with his 2 hands, walked back and placed it next to Brennan. Have a seat. Father Keira flexed his arms. You are quite muscular, remarked Mrs. McKinnon. Regular bench pressers, grinned Father Keira. So much for strength, little devil. He reached into his vestment, took out a small bottle and proceeded to pull out a cork stopper. Oh, the sprinkling of supposed holy water test, came laughter. I then winched in pain. Take it away, I cried. Brendan's body moved in mock anguish, with you announcing it as mere tap water and proclaiming me false. Father Keira replaced the cork stopper, pursing his lips. Holy water, tap water, sacramental wine, I can fend off your petty potions. Mrs. McKinnon leaned forward, looking distressed. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but closed them tightly. Brennan's head rolled side to side as he rose above the chair. Lights in the chapel flickered, loud noises rumbled. Another test, Father Cure announced. What is the first commandment? You expect a devil to not know such trivia, came the voice from Brennan's mouth. Anarchy, Anadwai, Alanaki. I am the Lord your God, recited Father Cure. And Dibber Emmet, you shall not bear false witness. Too easy. Thus, if you assert you are the devil, and such is true, you obey Alanai's commandments. But if such is false, you disobey. Father Cure smirked. The devil abide in God's word? Sophistry, intoned a voice. I can recite the 10 Commandments. You will not make sculptures of others. You will not bend down to them. Remember the Shabbat. Honour ye Father. Why, when you are so weak? It is the Holy Scriptures that weakens you. Father Cure gestured towards Brennan, whose body had settled back onto the chair. His words have power over you. Brennan's body squirmed. His head raised and flopped again. The lights brightened and then dulled. Leave our most gentle son, free him of your scorn, continued Father Cure. Brennan lifted his head to his face and then rubbed his head. There isn't any list of 10 Commandments, he said quietly. In his name, leave. What was that you said, Brennan? There isn't any list of 10 Commandments anywhere in the Bible. What, explained Father Cure? Of course there is. The light stopped flickering. Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, croaked the voice. Brennan shook his head and took a deep breath. If you look at Exodus 20 and count the thou shalt, there are 13. If you go to Deuteronomy 5, there is a list of 19 sayings that Moses is said to have brought down from the mountain. There is no list of commandments 1 to 10 in the Bible. Brennan stretched himself. Is that true, Father Cure? Asked Mrs. McKinnon. Well, sort of. The Bible doesn't say how to number them or join them together. There are various traditions within Christian communions. They all have the same 10 Commandments, but we number them differently. It's in the catechisms, if you recall. I did not say there were no commandments, just no list 1 to 10, rejoined Brendan. And if you go to Matthew 22, Jesus mentions, love the Lord your God. But the second commandment that Jesus states is from Leviticus 19, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. It is one of the over 600 commandments in the Old Testament. Fiddlesticks, groused a voice from Brennan's mouth. Brennan grimaced as he tried to open his mouth to speak. Fiddlesticks my ass, spoke Mrs. McKinnon. I think Brennan knows what he wants to say. She slapped the back of Brennan's head. Mrs. McKinnon, said Father Cure. Did I slap the wrong one? She said sheepishly. Sorry, Brennan. That's all right, Mrs. McKinnon, offered Brennan. I'm sure this is a tad confusing. It won't be confusing for much longer, said Father Cure. The goodness of all things demands you be banished to the dark place from which you come. He held the compendium above his head and started chanting. Non nobius Domine. Brennan's body twisted about, hands jerking, flatulence audible. Goodness of all things, the voice stuttered. What about Genesis 19, with God killing every man, woman and child at Sodom? Father Cure continued chanting. Non nobius Domine, non nobius Domine. Bright lights flashed like lightning about the ceiling. Crackles of thunder echoed. Mrs. McKinnon huddled behind her hands. 2 Samuel 12, with God slowly killing Bathsheba's baby. Exodus 12:29 and the killing of the firstborn. 1 Samuel 15, putting to death the Amalek women, children and infants. Non nobius Domine, and to your name give the glory. Rumble, crackle and boom sounded. Mrs. McKinnon was crying. 2 Kings 2, with 2 she-bears killing 42 boys. Oh, for God's sake, bellowed Father Cure, the boy's called Elijah Baldy. Swearing isn't proper, said Mrs. McKinnon softly. Sorry, said Father Cure. The killing of Job's children, injected the voice. Brendan stood up. You're sorry. You'll be sorrier, chimed Father Cure. Shut up, said Brennan. The thunder and lightning abruptly stopped. I'm tired of all this chanting, prayers, Bible quotes, bickering and noise. Mrs. McKenna sniffled. Brendan glared at her. I'm tired of you all. It will be okay, said Father Cure. Brendan took a step, his fist clenched. No, it won't. My son. I'm not your son. Stillness enveloped the church. Brennan breathed slowly. I'm leaving. You can go home if you like, said Father Cure calmly. I'm leaving here, this body, this place. Father Cure squinted. What do you mean, leaving this place? Well, you said you can drive that thing from my body. Well, it's welcome to my useless body. Brendan staggered as he moved towards the statue of Mary. It doesn't work like that. Why not? Brendan grasped the railing. If he can leave me, I can leave him. He knelt his head for prayer. Holy Mother, take my spirit from this broken body and into your loving embrace. Don't! Cried Father Kira. Brendan's body went limp and slowly collapsed to the floor. The lights in the church brightened briefly, then faded to their normal sedate level. Father Kira knelt and reached out to Brendan's body. Is he alive? Asked Mrs. McCannon. He is breathing. The body grasped and took another breath. Of course I'm breathing. He dragged himself up, winced. Gosh, that hurt. He tried to sit. That really hurts. Father Kira leaned forward to help the body sit up. The body shrugged and adjusted his position. Breathing laboured. Are human bodies supposed to hurt this much? Is that you? Asked Mrs. McKenna. Who else might it be? The body of what had been Brennan's moved, then winced with pain. Let me help you, said Father Kira as he tried to help the body sit up. Leave me be, he pulled back, wailing. Father Kira sat waiting. Mrs. McCannon shook his head. The body straightened and slumped again. You called yourself the devil, said Father Kira. Ought you not be able to lift yourself, levitate or something? I guess I'll need help in sitting up. The body reached and took Father Kira's hand. Mrs. McKinnon moved aside. You know I only called myself the devil to impress upon you. I'm a braggart, a big mouth. He leaned forward, trying to steady his breathing. We demons are prone to a little deceit, as I'm sure you know well. Father Kira turned about and saw the chair where Brendan had been sitting. Why don't you sit, Mrs. McKinnon? I'm quite fine, she said, crossing her arms. Now, what have you done to sweet Brennan? What have I done? What has he done to me? I think, said Father Kira, that you were stuck in Brennan's body. Where is Brennan then? Asked Mrs. McCannon. Father Kira waved his hand about his head as tiny radiances sparkled. Here, everywhere, in the bosom of our dear Lord, free of pain, of anxiety. Mrs. McCannon smiled as the sparkles faded. That's all well and good, demanded the body. Now complete your prayer thing and get me out of here. Father Kira placed his hands on his chin. I'm not sure that I can, or even if I should. Of course you should. You're a priest. Your job is to exorcise evil ones such as me. You deserve to be stuck in there after what you did to poor Brennan, chided Mrs. McCannon. And you pose a problem, added Father Kira as he stood. There's the ethical dimension that you possessed the body of a disabled and susceptible lad. You made your bed and now you get to sleep in it. Well, sleep, walk, stumble, struggle with the toilet, need others to cut up your food, no sex. Mrs. McCannon blushed. You're a man of God, lamented body. You must practice grace, forgiveness, tolerance. You'll get no tolerance from me, said Mrs. McCannon as she slapped his face again. I think he's going to suffer enough. Father Kira held up a hand to prevent any further slaps. I'm more concerned about how I'm going to explain this situation to the bishop, to the police. Nothing to explain, the body farted. Just finish the exorcism. You're animating a soulless body, he tapped his fingers together. Without your present, well, I have just a body. How do I explain that? So, you'll have a body. You anoint the dead and conduct funerals. This is just another job. Watch your calendar later in the week. A body with Mrs. McCannon and I here conducting an exorcism. I'm sure you can see how that doesn't look good. Questions will be asked. Am I going to get into trouble? Asked Mrs. McCannon. No, not at all. I think it is time for you to go home. I'll walk our demon friend home to Brennan's apartment. I don't want to go to Brennan's apartment. I want to get out of here. I can't do that. Father Kira started picking up the plastic sheet and rolling it away. You'll need a name. What would you like to be called? I am... See, without a soul to control, you're kind of nameless. Bob, said Mrs. McKinnon. That is like Brennan. That is who folk will think he is. She walked over to the bucket that she had brought the flowers, picked it up and then headed to the church door. Good night, Father Kira. Good night, Bob. She opened the door and left. Come along, said Father Kira. Lean on me and I'll help you walk. Bob awkwardly stood and took Father Kira's arm. They slowly walked towards the door. Will I always hurt? I'm afraid so. They reached the church door. But I'll be here for you, said Father Kira. I have to turn out the lights now. I'll get it. The lights flashed, then went out all at once. The church was dark.